the Zalvani Empire had conquered hundreds of worlds, bending lesser civilizations to their will with technology so advanced that resistance was rarely more than a formality. Their warships darkened the skies of Earth in a display of effortless superiority, shimmering with energy fields impervious to primitive human weapons. Plasma cannons and ion disruptors melted through city defenses as if they were made of paper. It was not a war, it was a demonstration, and humanity, in their eyes, was nothing more than another species too foolish to accept its place. Commander Varesh stood at the heart of the Zalvani War Council, his armored form reflecting the cold blue glow of the holographic battlefield projection. The conquest was ahead of schedule. Major human cities had fallen, their armies shattered, their most advanced weapons reduced to debris. The primitive species still clung to outdated projectile-based armaments, an absurdity that had drawn laughter from the Zalvani officers. These so-called humans, one of them scoffed, tapping a clawed finger against the map where Earth's military bases once stood, still rely on ballistic weapons, slugs of metal propelled by chemical combustion. How quaint! A chorus of amusement rippled through the room. To the Zalvani, war had long evolved past such crude methods. Their energy shields rendered projectiles useless, dispersing kinetic impact into harmless light. Even their foot soldiers walked the battlefield without fear, confident in their superior armor, their devastating weapons. Yet resistance lingered. Scattered human factions still roamed the ruins, engaging in what the Zalvani dismissed as the death throes of an inferior species. Small units attacked supply lines, detonated crude explosives, then vanished into the shadows. Annoyances, nothing more. But Varesh understood war better than most of his kind. He had seen species fight long after hope had died, striking from desperation, from pride, and something about humanity unsettled him. Eliminate them, Varesh ordered, his voice smooth, measured. Sweep the ruins, exterminate their fighters, dismantle their infrastructure. The sooner this world is pacified, the sooner it can serve the Empire. The officers saluted, confident in their inevitable victory. None of them doubted that the last of humanity's fire would soon be snuffed out. Deep in the wreckage of a fallen city, a lone figure lay motionless atop a half-crumbled skyscraper, wrapped in camouflage that blended seamlessly with the charred ruins. The sniper known only as Ghost had been watching the Zalvani for days, studying their patrols, their defenses, their arrogant disregard for cover. The alien commanders, towering and armored, moved through their occupation zones without caution, their shields shimmering faintly with every step. Ghost tightened his grip on the rifle, an old but meticulously maintained weapon. Unlike the Zalvani, he had no drones, no satellites feeding him information, only patience, training, and the understanding that one well-placed shot could change everything. A Zalvani officer strode into view, surrounded by a small squad. From this distance, Ghost could see the casual confidence in their posture, the way they carried themselves like gods among insects. A slow breath, a slight shift in the wind. The shot was a calculation of gravity, distance, the shimmer of the heat rising from the rubble. Ghost pulled the trigger. The rifle cracked, the sound swallowed by the vast ruins. A fraction of a second later, the Zalvani officer's head snapped backward in a grotesque arc, the bullet piercing through his shield as if it didn't exist. The body hit the ground, lifeless, before the other aliens even processed what had happened. Panic erupted. The Zalvani warriors scrambled for cover, their shields flickering erratically as if trying to adjust to a threat they had never considered. More shots rang out, each one precise, each one defying the invaders' understanding of warfare. Ghost exhaled, already shifting positions, already disappearing into the ruins. The war had just changed, and the Zalvani, for the first time, were afraid. The Zalvani Empire did not panic easily. Their military doctrine was built on absolute control over the battlefield, over their technology, over the species they conquered. Wars were not fought, they were resolved, executed with the precision of an engineer dismantling a faulty machine. But now, the machine had begun to break. Commander Varesh stood before the body of one of his finest officers, his expression unreadable. The corpse lay on a medical slab, its once proud armor punctured cleanly at the skull. No cauterization, no plasma scoring, just a neat, brutal hole where a moment earlier there had been a living being. Around him, his officers murmured in disbelief. A malfunction? One suggested hesitantly. A traitor? Another offered, as if the thought was less absurd than the alternative. Varesh said nothing. He had already reviewed the footage. There was no traitor, no internal sabotage. The officer had died from a primitive kinetic round, a mere slug of metal propelled with force, undeterred by their energy shields. It was impossible. And yet here was the proof lying cold before them. The humans have found a weakness, he said finally, his voice cutting through the uneasy speculation. Or perhaps they always knew of one. The thought unsettled him. The Zalvani had studied humanity's history, their slow evolution of warfare. Their projectile-based weapons had been dismissed as outdated, crude, yet they had been perfected over centuries. The energy shields that had rendered them obsolete were not designed to counter objects traveling at extreme velocities. They had been engineered to absorb and disperse plasma fire, ion bursts, directed energy attacks, the weapons of advanced civilizations. A well-placed bullet, however, did not yield to dispersal. It did not slow, did not waver, did not announce itself with light and heat. It simply arrived, carrying death in its silent wake. Who is responsible for this? An officer growled. Is it an anomaly, or are we dealing with something more? The answer came in the following days as more bodies fell. Zalvani officers, once untouchable behind their shimmering defenses, began dropping in streets, in command centers, even within the heart of occupied zones. There was no warning, no visible enemy. The sniper was a ghost, striking from impossible distances before fading into the ruins. Rumors spread like wildfire. Some believed the humans had developed a weapon that could pass through shields. Others whispered of an artificial intelligence, a machine programmed to kill within human precision. Superstition took root, a disease the Zalvani had not encountered in centuries. There were those who swore the sniper was not human at all, but something else entirely. A spirit of war, a force beyond their understanding. Varesh did not entertain such nonsense, but he did acknowledge one fact. This single operative, this unknown assassin, was turning the tide of war, not in grand battles, not in open confrontation, but through fear. The Zalvani did not know where he would strike next, and for the first time, they hesitated. Ghost had become more than a soldier. He had become a weapon. From his vantage point deep within the wreckage of another fallen city, Ghost watched a Zalvani patrol move through the rubble. They were more cautious now, their confidence fractured, their formations tighter, but they still did not understand. They still relied on technology to protect them, on shields that had already failed them. Ghost adjusted his aim, the scope settling over the commander at the center of the formation. He exhaled, let his heartbeat dictate the rhythm, then pulled the trigger. The shot landed before the sound reached them. The commander collapsed, armor useless, shield flickering in vain. The Zalvani soldiers broke formation, scanning wildly for an enemy they could not see. Ghost was already moving, already vanishing into the ruins. It would not be enough to win the war, but it would be enough to remind them that for all their technology, all their arrogance, they could still die, and that, more than any weapon, was what terrified them the most. The Zalvani no longer walked the streets with confidence. The shimmering arrogance that once surrounded them like an unbreakable shield had fractured, replaced by a quiet, creeping fear. They still held the cities, still commanded the skies, still possessed weapons that could reduce entire buildings to ash, but none of it mattered when a single unseen enemy could end a life with one pull of a trigger. The war had changed. Commander Varesh had seen planetary resistance before, but never like this. Rebellions were loud, desperate things, full of reckless defiance and predictable patterns. They relied on numbers, on crude explosives, on the belief that dying in battle meant something. But this was different. The humans were learning, adapting, spreading ghost tactics among their fractured resistance cells. It had begun with whispers. A sniper had killed an officer. Then another. Then a squad leader. The Zalvani adjusted their patrols, changed formations, increased their use of aerial drones. The humans responded in kind, using decoys, ghillie suits, subsonic rounds. Now, even the most routine assignments felt like walking through a battlefield unseen. The death toll rose. At first, it was limited to high-ranking officers. Then supply convoys began disappearing. Drivers found slumped over controls with small, precise holes in their skulls. Zalvani command centers came under fire, not in full assaults, but with a methodical precision that left bodies cooling in their chairs before alarms could sound. No Zalvani dared to linger too long in the open. Varesh stood in his war room, watching the growing list of casualties. The table before him was strewn with reports, surveillance footage, and projected statistics. The humans should have been defeated by now. Their armies had been shattered, their cities reduced to husks of their former selves. And yet, a single operative had ignited something far more dangerous than an armed resistance: hope. It was the one enemy the Zalvani had never been able to crush completely. "This is unacceptable," Overlord Karek growled, his armored form towering over the War Council. His red-hued carapace gleamed under the dim lighting, his eyes burning with barely contained fury. "We are the Zalvani. We do not cower from primitives wielding outdated weapons." Varesh remained silent. He had learned long ago that Karek valued his own voice above all others. "We will deploy countermeasures immediately," the Overlord continued. "Scout drones, seismic trackers, heat mapping algorithms. This ghost will be found, and when he is, I will crush his skull with my own hands." One of the officers hesitated. The humans are using older methods to hide their presence. Thermal masking, insulating materials, some are even burying themselves beneath rubble for days at a time. "Our sensors are unreliable." Karek turned on him, his mandibles twitching. "Then we burn them out. Every suspected hideout, every ruin, every building they could possibly use for shelter. They will scatter," Varesh said, finally speaking, "and they will adapt. You do not hunt ghosts by burning shadows." Karek's gaze snapped toward him, his expression a mixture of irritation and curiosity. "Then what do you propose, Commander?" "We set a trap." Silence filled the room. Varesh continued, his tone measured. "We will leak false intelligence. A high-profile target, vulnerable, seemingly unaware of the sniper threat. A location carefully chosen, one where we control every approach, every angle, every possible escape route." "And when he takes the bait?" Karek asked. Varesh met his gaze. "We close the jaws." For a moment, there was only the hum of the war table, the flickering of holographic maps. Then Karek let out a low, approving rumble. "Make it happen," he ordered. "I want that sniper's head." Far from the War Council's deliberations, Ghost knelt in the ruins of a collapsed cathedral, his rifle cradled in his hands. He had heard the whispers, an opportunity too good to ignore. A high-ranking Zalvani official, unprotected, exposed in an abandoned district. It was a perfect shot. It was also a trap. He knew it. Every instinct told him the Zalvani were getting desperate, that this was too convenient, too well-placed. And yet he could not walk away. Because if it wasn't a trap, if the target was real, then this could be the shot that ended the war. Ghost adjusted his scope, steadied his breath, and waited. The Zalvani had chosen their battlefield carefully. The district was a skeletal ruin of its former self, a shattered landscape of broken steel and crumbling concrete. It provided cover, but only the illusion of it. Hidden within the ruins were drones, motion sensors, and thermal scanners, all calibrated to detect even the slightest movement. Elite Zalvani marksmen, trained in counter-sniper warfare, had taken positions in the surrounding buildings. The air hummed with tension, thick with the anticipation of a kill. At the center of it all stood Overlord Karek, draped in ceremonial war armor, his massive frame a deliberate lure. He did not pace, did not fidget, did not give any indication that he was aware of the unseen predator in the ruins. He simply stood, an unspoken challenge radiating from every inch of his being. Come, human, take your shot. Ghost lay prone beneath a collapsed overpass, his rifle nestled against the rubble. He had been here for hours, unmoving, watching the Zalvani prepare their ambush. The false vulnerability of Karek, the slight, unnatural precision of the soldiers' positioning, it all screamed of a carefully crafted snare. And yet, it didn't matter. The Overlord was real. The shot mattered. Ghost let his breathing slow, his heart rate settle into a practiced rhythm. He measured the distance, calculated the wind, factored in the heat distortion rising from the sun-scorched wreckage. The Zalvani believed they had accounted for every possibility, but they had made a fatal miscalculation. They assumed he would take the obvious shot. He adjusted his aim, shifting slightly to the right, lining up his crosshairs on a crumbling support column nearly a kilometer away. The structure had been weakened by war, standing only by the stubborn defiance of rusted steel. A single well-placed shot would send it toppling. Ghost pulled the trigger. The bullet struck true, shattering the already fractured beam. With a groaning wail, the structure collapsed, sending a massive cloud of dust and debris surging through the district. The Zalvani ambush team reacted instantly, their sensors blinded by the sudden chaos, their formations thrown into disarray. And in that moment, as the world choked on dust, Ghost took his real shot. The bullet sliced through the air, unseen, unheard. It bypassed the Overlord's personal shielding, tearing through armored plating, puncturing the thick exoskeleton beneath. Karek staggered. His massive form jerked, mandibles clenching in a final involuntary twitch. His legs buckled, and then he fell, his body hitting the rubble-strewn ground with the weight of something inevitable. For a heartbeat, the battlefield was silent. Then chaos erupted. Zalvani soldiers shouted, scrambling for cover, firing wildly into the dust cloud. Drones spun in frantic loops, searching for an enemy who had already vanished. Without their overlord, command fractured, orders lost in the confusion. Fear, the slow poison Ghost had been feeding them for weeks, finally consumed them whole. Yet Ghost did not stay to watch the Empire unravel. The shot had been made, but survival demanded movement. He rolled away from his position, disappearing into the labyrinth of debris, slipping through the cracks of a dying city. He had long since learned that victory was not about a single moment, but about what came after. The Zalvani, however, were not ready to accept defeat. Commander Varesh had been monitoring the operation from a warship hovering miles above the surface, and though his overlord lay dead in the streets, his mind remained clear. This was no longer about a single sniper. This was about the fragility of Zalvani dominance, the realization that they were not invincible. The moment he fires, unleash everything, Varesh had ordered before the mission began. And so they did. Orbital cannons roared to life, their targeting systems locking onto the ruins where the shot had come from. Buildings vaporized in an instant, streets turned to molten slag. Shockwaves ripped through the city, toppling what little remained. The Zalvani did not care if they destroyed their own troops in the process. All that mattered was erasing the human Ghost from existence. Ghost ran. The ground split behind him, fire and debris cascading through the ruins. The air itself felt like it was screaming, the pressure threatening to crush him. His body moved on instinct, vaulting over collapsed structures, diving into underground tunnels moments before entire blocks were wiped from the map. He had expected retaliation. He had not expected this. The Zalvani were tearing apart their own occupation zones just to kill him. Not because he was a soldier, not because he had killed their leader, but because of what he represented. Humanity had not died. They had learned, adapted, fought, and they had wounded an empire in a way no species had before. Ghost crawled through a ruined sewer tunnel, every muscle screaming in protest. He had escaped the worst of the bombardment, but his ears rang with the aftershock of destruction. His rifle was still with him, battered but functional. His body was bruised, bloodied, but alive. Above him, the Zalvani warships hung in the sky, but they were no longer gods. They were no longer untouchable, because now they were afraid. Across the planet, resistance fighters, who had once thought their cause was Lost heard the news. A single sniper had killed an overlord. A lone soldier had shattered the illusion of Zalvani supremacy. And the war that had once seemed so one-sided suddenly had a new possibility. Hope. Ghost did not smile. There was still too much to do, too many battles left to fight. He would keep moving, keep striking from the shadows. Because wars were not won by a single bullet. But sometimes a single bullet was enough to remind an empire that it could bleed